Hey screen printers, in this instructional video we're going to learn how to screen print wet on a light garment and then overprint an underbase with our new Green Galaxy water-based inks. Over there we have three new colors that just came out: the Supernova, Light Blue, the Lightspeed Lime, and then the Galactic Gold. We're going to print that wet on a light garment and then go Comet White underprint and then print those over the top on a dark garment. So let's start about talking a little bit about the ink and mesh. First of all, whenever you're printing with water-based ink, if you're going to be doing a long-run job, you want to use a water-resistant emulsion. We're using the TX Discharge emulsion today. We're using standard mesh screens for the overprint, and we're going to be using a solid lock screen for the underprint. The underprint is a 110 mesh. The overprint is a 156 mesh or 160 mesh. Now the overprint could be a little bit higher mesh, but to do less passes, we're going to be going with the 156 mesh. Let's start by doing our wet on wet print. Whenever you're doing wet on wet printing or overprinting on an underbase for that matter, you always want to start out with the smallest part of your design. So this Northwest Born is going to be the smallest part of my design. I'm going to start out with this, the second smallest, and then the biggest part of the design, going wet on wet without a flash. Once you start flashing on a dark garment with an underbase, you definitely need to do the same thing, only applying ink to those sections at a time. We want to do this with the minimal flashing as possible. So on a light garment, water-based ink is great for wet on wet printing. We could even go on a little bit higher mesh. But since this job is also going to be printed on a white underbase, we're going on the 156 mesh. If we weren't needing to go on the underbase, we could probably go a 200 or a 230 on just the wet on wet printing. All right, so let's load the ink and start printing. We always want to load the stencil up, and today we're going to be doing a push print. So all these will be pushed. Typically with water-based, especially when we're starting it out, do 2 pushes or 2 passes, making sure that ink comes through great. That is just fine. Always also want to leave the screen flooded so you cannot see the image through your ink film. So blue came out great. This is an awesome green color. Perfect for this logo. Once again, leave our screen flooded. Not using a ton of ink in the screen here, just enough for demonstration purposes, and then the final print. So wet on wet printing, whenever you can get away with it, is extremely fast and definitely the way to go. So the design came out great wet on wet. So there's the wet on wet design. And we could go very, very, very fast printing that design because there's no flashing involved. Now curing, water-based ink does cure a little bit longer than plastisol. Still cures at 320, but you need to make sure that all the water evaporates out of it before it hits that curing point. If you don't have an awesome conveyor dryer, a long, nice tunnel, what you can do is you can use warp drive and add it into the ink, which lowers the curing temperature to about 200 degrees as long as you let that ink sit for 48 hours before you go to wash it. So 2 curing options there, but this does need to cure to 320 degrees, typically about 1.5 minutes dwell time if you're using just a standard dryer. So wet on wet print came out great. Let's try the underbase with the Comet White, flash it, and then overprint the same colors. Okay, so we're going to start out with the white. We're using a solid lock frame. The reason why we're using a solid lock frame specifically for this print is it gives us higher tension, which will transfer the ink better to our garment. The white ink is going to be a little bit thicker. Same thing with plastisol. Water-based white's a little thicker. Using a big squeegee, it's a pretty wide print, so the tighter tension we have, the better. So once again, just load that Comet White ink in there. Sure it gets worked up on the edge of our squeegee real nice so it slides. And then we're going to be pushing. Now off contact is a lot more important when you're doing an underbase print and an overprint on top of that. So we'll leave that screen flooded there. Nice bright white. It's through a 110 mesh. Depending on if your design has white in it, sometimes you may have to flash this and print it again if it has, like, let's say the Rhino was in white, or you could do a highlight screen for that layer. For this, because it's just an underbase, 1 pass is fine. So we're going to be using a Riley Hopkins forced air flash, and we're going to flash this for about, let's say 10 seconds or so using this flash. This flash can actually do a lot faster job. The forced air allows that water to evaporate a little bit faster, so those are optimal, but you can use an IR flash. These inks do flash fairly fast with IR flashes. So we'll test that, see how that goes. And we're looking for the ink to be a little tiny tacky, but not too bad. All right, so now let's do the overprint. The other thing is when you're printing, you only want to print the area of your design. So if your design only is at the bottom, only print the bottom. Always go from the smallest part of the print to the biggest part of the print, and or light to dark. So in this scenario, we are going light to dark, and we're going smallest to biggest. Actually, maybe blue is a little bit lighter. So once again, off contact, very important. Leave that screen flooded. So there's the blue. Came out good. Now our goal is to try to do this without flashing between colors. Depending on how this goes, we may have to add a flash in there. So we're going to try it first without flashing. Just overprinting the certain areas. This ink has a very, very good overtime or open time in the mesh. All right, there we have it. Now, we got a pretty good result. Pretty nice and yellow, pretty green. We can see that when we stepped on the green, we did get a little bit of an ink pickup. Now, as our screen has a little bit of buildup, we will avoid that, but it came out pretty nice. So let's try it again as we get a little bit of buildup. We also can add a flash in there to protect maybe some of the color as well. So we can try it with one extra flash to see how that goes, see if we get any brighter color. But first go around without any buildup on the screen, actually it looks pretty darn good. So underbase this again, get a good ink transfer down. Now with the Comet White, definitely find that 2 passes is key for screen release. And in this case, because this ink was sitting here a little bit, we're just going to do one more. Make sure we're solid. So once again, nice and bright, underbase. We'll flash this. This time we're going to try it with some flashing between the colors. Always leaving the screen flooded. There's blue. And then once you get this ink warm, you can flash really quickly. We'll go green. Two prints. Quick flash. And then gold. Got to make sure we get a good amount of pressure that has a little bit too much off contact. That's why I hit it so many times. So there we have it. Flash between every color. And that looks really good. So definitely brighter, so that's without the flashing between the colors. And then that's with flashing between the colors. Both could be acceptable depending on what your customer is looking for. Whenever you're water-based printing, if you can add flashes, it will make life a little easier. As you become more experienced with the ink, if you can go wet on wet, obviously light garments, wet on wet's no problem, but when you're printing over an underbase, if you can go wet on wet, based around how big your print area is and how the color picks up, and then if you can build some ink up on the back of the screen to allow that transfer to happen a little bit more naturally, your job will go a little bit faster. But great colors, awesome design, very smooth hand and feel once the shirt is cured, lasts just as long as Plastisol. All using the new Green Galaxy inks available exclusively from Ryonet. So check out all these inks on our website, check out more Green Galaxy videos on our YouTube page, and be sure to subscribe for more awesome screen printing videos. Thanks a lot for watching, guys.